Chapter 1, Part 2. Crescent City is located along the edge of Northern California, not far from the Oregon border. The surrounding area possesses what is perhaps the most beautiful landscape on the planet Earth. Redwood trees reaching far into the clouds speak of an area where fairy tales are woven. And just beyond this enchanting forest, far as the eyes can see, stretches forth the alluring waters of the Pacific Ocean. Crescent City, once a booming logging town, is now a quiet tourist attraction, largely populated with the families of the personnel who work in the state's most oppressive prison. In contrast to the surrounding beauty, Pelican Bay State Prison is built on the outskirts of Crescent City, hidden from the public's view. Imagine for a moment finding yourself in a wilderness infested with human predators of the worst kind, all of them laying in wait for a victim to prey upon, where survival of the fittest is the name of the game. A wilderness where those in charge of presenting the rule of law cannot be trusted, lest you fall victim of their own predatory nature. The prison is an ensemble of monolithic structures, huge blocks of concrete sitting side by side like tombstones in a burial ground made for giants. On most days, chilly coastal winds howl mournfully through the electrically charged fences surrounding the security housing unit SHU. The entire prison complex sits on barren ground, like a still picture taken in black and white. Weighted down by the burden it carried, the gray goose rolled sluggishly through the final security gate. I imagine the words, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here," scrawled all over the SHU entrance. An admonishment fit for such a dreadful place. The prisoners all wore a somber, ghostly mask as we stared out the windows. There on the loading dock stood a squadron of guards fully outfitted in riot gear. They glared at us with facial expressions that threatened, "Go on, make my day." We stared back in defiance. Some of us cursed, some grumbled obscenities, others sat, tensed, fists balled up, mentally poised to meet the challenge that they awaited. It was a display of the champion in the man rising to the occasion. Whatever gang rivalries, racial and bigoted views we harbored toward one another prior to boarding the bus had now reared its ugly head in the direction of a common and formidable enemy. The imminent threat before us had brought us together as a force to be reckoned with. I could feel its dark power coursing through and around this unity, an alliance with the potential of changing the Department of Corrections' inhumane treatment of its prisoners. Conditions in prisons across the U.S. have worsened and have become more oppressive over the last 3 decades, while prisoners continue to self-destruct from within via internal conflicts and prison political strife. We are the culprits of our own demise, our own worst enemy. It is us who provide the system with the means by which to oppress us. It is us who give them the power of control over our fate. Shit, the federal government has the means and technology by which to topple foreign countries, as it has proven in the past. So it's fair to say the dismantling of a gang or radical organization is a walk in the park for them. On the other hand, we also possess the means by which to turn the tide of oppression, become masters of our own destiny. If only our energies were directed in the direction of those objectives rather than at one another. Prison officials fully recognize this potential threat and treat it as if it were a matter of national security, which perhaps would be in view of the power prisoners would possess should they ever come across as one entity. But for that to ever emerge, they would first have to place their political and racial agendas to one side, redirect their energy and ideals into a broader perspective and for the betterment of all convicts. It's no secret guards are trained to spot this type of threat, and theirs is to disrupt, divide, and dominate, just as they were doing that very moment. One by one, we were removed from the bus, separated, and individually escorted by 2 guards in a tunnel-like hallway. As I watched the first couple of prisoners disappear into the underground chamber, I was seized by the foreboding feeling that those of us who had arrived together would now never again see one another. The years that would roll by proved my gut feeling had been right. When it was my turn to enter the mouth of this concrete monster, I was ordered to walk between 2 orange lines that traveled down the center of a long hallway. One step over the line, one of the guards warned, "And you're going down." Like an angel of death, a third guard appeared above us. He walked on a graded catwalk holding a Mini 14 assault rifle at the ready. The catwalk vibrated with each step he took, sending shivers down the back of my neck. We had traveled some 80 yards when the hallway branched off into a labyrinth of corridors, snaking their way to one of the 24 security housing units situated throughout this cave-like structure. Every security housing unit has its own computerized control tower from which a guard monitors and commands every gate and every cell door in the 6 pods that surrounds the control nerve center. Each pod, separated from the next, contains 8 windowless cells, all with identical furnishings: a thin mat on top of a concrete slab, a stainless steel toilet sink combo bolted to the concrete floor beneath a fluorescent light encased in a stainless steel box. A thick iron door at the rear of each pod leads out to an individual exercise yard 10 feet wide, 20 feet long, with surrounding 18-foot walls. One half of the top is covered with plexiglass to minimize the fall of sleet and rain common to the area. The other half is topped with screen mesh made of steel to allow the air to filter down into this boxcar enclosure. A security camera mounted high on the wall monitors a prisoner's every move. Panoramic views are non-existent in the chute. All you see is the color gray on gray on gray. The pod we entered was deathly quiet. Eyes peered at me from behind perforated cells. I was being sized up and evaluated by the other prisoners there to determine if I were a friend or foe. The only sound came from the sliding, grinding of a cell door opening and then charging shut behind me. The inside of the cell smelled as if I had just fallen into a septic tank. There was dried feces and urine on the walls, the result of a previous occupant. A prisoner by the name of Von Dorst had become unhinged and gas bombed 2 of the guards there. A gas bomb is a concoction of urine, shit, and spoiled food. Since arrival, several weeks earlier, Von had been asking to speak with someone about issues going on inside his head. Finding a new loon to poke a stick at, the guards began to taunt and harass him. Over a short period of time, Von's mental condition deteriorated further and further into that dark maze of madness. Using fecal matter, he smeared obscenities on the wall and loudly cursed at the demons that tormented him. At times, prisoners in adjoining cells could hear him cry out like a child in pain, and at other times, hear him laugh hysterically. Then one day, all went quiet. The other prisoners thought he had perhaps committed suicide. The unit guards also picked up on the sudden silence and entered the pod to investigate. Strips of toilet paper hung from inside the perforated part of the cell, making it difficult for the guards to see inside. When they got close enough to open the tray slot, a nasty surprise awaited. Von had not taken his own life. The guards didn't see it coming, nor had they expected it. From out of his toilet, Von scooped cup after cup of shit and piss and bathed the guards with it. The smell was horrendous and the guards cried out furiously. The stink of shit stuck on them like crazy glue. Von's laughter rivaled a pack of crazed hyenas. Prisoners in adjoining cells got into the fracas, cursing and mocking the guards to further aggravate them. The guards, furious and in a rage, retreated. But it wasn't over, not by a long shot. They returned 20 minutes later wearing overalls and face masks. Too much, too little, too late, I would say. Nonetheless, they also came strapped for the occasion. They first saturated Von's cell with pepper spray to the point where he could not see or breathe. Then they dragged him out and beat him into unconsciousness. With shackles tightly placed on his ankles, Von was then dragged away to another location in the chute. It was later learned he had been taken to the chute infirmary, where he had been forced into a tub of boiling water. Had it not been for a nurse who heard the blood-curdling screams, Von would have been boiled to death. By the time the nurse intervened, chunks of tissue and skin had already fallen from around his legs. Von was not a gang member, a radical, nor a jailhouse lawyer. He was simply an incorrigible clown who didn't quite fit the average convict profile. He had simply become a statistic to the prison system, nothing more than a number to fill a bed space. He had been sent to prison to serve out a short term for a petty theft with a prior, a sentence normally served out in the county jail, or at worst, in a minimum security institution. Instead, he was sent to the worst prison in the state of California. What a nightmare it must have been for him. In a study conducted by a group of scientists, they found prisoners subjected to prolonged solitary confinement had a significantly higher likelihood of dying within the first year of their release back into the community. The study used data from the North Carolina Department of Public Safety, tracking some 230,000 prisoners. 78% of the prisoners who died committed suicide and 54% were murdered. Additionally, 127% were prone to die of drug overdose within 2 weeks of their release. This is the future that awaits most after a prolonged period in solitary confinement. And this is why it is paramount that a determination be made wisely by educated professionals and with the guiding hand of a psychiatrist to decide what measures must be taken long before a prisoner is scheduled for release from solitary confinement and back out into the community. I grew up in the 60s, an era reeling in radical political and social strife. Institutions across the nation were grappling with segregation. As a boy, even though I was being victimized by the effects of racial bigotry, I was not able to fully grasp its negativity. That is, until I began to attend grade school. Many of the teachers at the school I attended must have resented desegregation by the way they treated children of color. Learning to read and write was at first a delight for me. But before long, it wasn't such a big thrill. To be punished for being over-inquisitive began to affect me. The raising of hands by children of color was frowned upon by bigoted teachers. Ours was a culture teachers at that school did not want to accept. The language we spoke, our way of dress and mannerisms was treated antisocial and un-American. It was then when bigotry began to take focus. By the age of 10, I was on the street shining shoes and selling newspapers. I had to compensate for the allowance my mother was not able to afford us. Most of my profit was made on Soledad Street, a red light district also known as Chinatown. It was a high crime area littered with cheap bars and shady pool halls. The area was typically frequented by lonely migrant workers seeking comfort in the arms of prostitutes and by the downtrodden looking to drown their sorrows in drugs and alcohol. Soledad Street was dominated by pimps, drug dealers, and ghetto hood thugs. Yet, these are the people who looked after me in their own peculiar way. Some would buy me a newspaper in spite of the fact they couldn't read. Others would have me shine their worn, beat-up shoes that weren't worth the wax wasted on them. Hookers would tease me playfully and slide me a 25-cent piece here and there. Not the meaty kind either. The barmaids on occasion would reach out from over the counter with a bag of potato chips or maybe a packet of beef jerky and then con one of the patrons into picking up the tab. It was here on Soledad Street that I made the bulk of my nickels and dimes, which back in those days was a little something something. I suspect these acts of kindness came from a strong sense of having walked in my shoes during their childhood. It's odd too that despite all the bickering that went on amongst them, they never had a harsh word for me. At times, I would get together with my best friend and go work in the fields. We would be at it from 6 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. 10 long, hard hours of harvesting lettuce, potatoes, strawberries, or whatever crop was in season. Our goal was to make enough money to join the Boy Scouts of America. A boy wasn't permitted membership unless he was able to afford to buy into its organization. Then came the purchasing of all the accessories that went along with being a Boy Scout, the uniform, the pocket knife, and so forth. But as it turned out, our goal was never to be fulfilled. At the age of 12, I entered junior high school. I thought things would improve, but they only seemed to worsen. No matter how hard I tried, it was never enough for my teachers. My mother, overburdened by 2 jobs, tried to counsel me the best way she could. But what did she know? After all, she was just a woman. Oh, and how she proved me wrong. She understood my growing pains more than I had given her credit for. I recall the day me and 2 other boys had been suspended from school after being caught in the boys' locker room looking at a Playboy girly magazine. My mother was required to accompany me to the dean's office before I would be allowed back in school. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of the dean's desk next to my mother. "This," the dean said, tapping the magazine with his right index finger, "is what your son, along with 2 other boys, were caught looking at in the boys' locker room." My mother reached across the dean's desk, picked up the magazine, and quickly flipped through the pages. She paused as if in thought and then looked over at me. What I saw in her face wasn't a look of anger or disgust, but rather one of compassion and understanding. I must have turned 3 different shades of colors with embarrassment. The dean sat behind his desk with a smug look on his alcoholic face. He sported a suit of importance that was way too big for him. He reminded me of Boss Hogg, that greasy, grimy character from the TV show The Dukes of Hazzard. In my mind, my mom was virtually a saint, and I felt as if the dean was disrespecting her. At that moment, I hated him more than I have hated anyone else or anything else in this world. But what my mom did next threw me for a loop. Closing the magazine, she purposely let it slip from her hand and into a wastebasket near the dean's desk. She then looked directly at the fat man behind the desk and said, "Sir, my son has just turned 12. It's an age of discovery for kids his age. What normal, healthy boys do at that age. At least the boys had the common sense and decency of seeing it in the boys' locker room." And with that, we walked out of the dean's office, never saying another word about it. I was back in school the following day as if the suspension had never occurred. Not once during my teenage years did I stop to consider what my mother must have been going through as a single parent of 8. I never considered asking her why she flew the US flag every Memorial Day, nor why she opened our home to GIs during the Vietnam War. Many years later, I would come to know the remarkably strong woman she had been. In particular, during those trying years when the world was in turmoil. The US flag was in tribute to my father, the same flag that was draped over his coffin. She had been right all along, and in all she had tried to convey to me, that it was a time of struggle and strife, and I was expected to try harder than the privileged. She did what she could to encourage me in overcoming the bigoted, biased obstacles I was faced with. But instead of taking her advice to heart, I allowed anger to cloud my discretion, and I rebelled. Things in school did not get any better. After the locker room episode, I became a target of the physical education teacher. I suspect him to be a personal friend of the dean's as well. The physical education department, PE, had a program in place where boys could compete physically to gain status within the school circle and, more importantly, gain popularity with the girls. In the beginning, boys would be issued a pair of blue exercise shorts. From blue, they would advance to red, then to green, gold, and finally platinum. One was expected to overcome certain physical exercises and obstacle courses to achieve a status of color.